Hi guys, welcome and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to make this asymmetric pencil skirt, and if that's something that you would like to see, definitely keep watching. It promises to be another fun and detailed tutorial, and I'm sure by the time you are done, you'll be able to make your own asymmetric pencil skirt. Also, if you haven't subscribed, I would like to invite you to be a part of this DIY fam, and all you need to do is hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell so you don't miss out on the awesome content that I have for you. Thank you so much guys, and enjoy the video. To make your own asymmetrical pencil skirt, you need the following items. You'll need your zipper, and this goes for the skirt. You'd also need your measuring tape, and this is basically to take measurements and put measurements down onto your fabric. You'll need your lining, and I've got about 1.5 yards of lining right here. However, you could need more or less depending on your size. You'd also need your main fabric, and for me, I'm using this pink crepe fabric, and I've got about 1 yard of the fabric. However, like I said earlier, you could also need more or less. I've also got 2 other fabrics that I like to add onto my design, and for me, I've got this orange and black fabric, and they're basically just scrap fabric that I had lying down in my workshop. You'd also need your skirt hook and eye, and basically this goes onto the band of the skirt, and this is what it looks like. You need some pattern paper to draft your patterns because we're going to be drafting a skirt block. So yes, you do need some pattern paper. You also need your varying curve, and this is what the varying curve looks like. You would also need your hip curve. So I've got the varying curve and the hip curve in my hand. And if you would like to shop any of these items, do check out the links in the description bar if you're in the US or in the UK. I've also got my ruler here, and I would like to work with my short ruler, as you all know, and I've also got my long ruler. You'd need your paper scissors to cut out your pattern when you're done drafting. You'd also need your fabric scissors to cut out your fabric. You need your tailor's chalk to make markings onto your fabric. You need some pins, and I've got these pins here that I like, and of course you need your pencil and eraser. However, for the purpose of this video, I'll be making use of a Sharpie. Start off by drafting your skirt block. If you don't know how to draft your skirt block, don't worry about it because I've got a detailed tutorial showing you how to draft a basic skirt block. I'm going to put the link to the video in the description bar as well as in the iCards above. So go ahead and click on it and then go ahead and watch the video. It's really detailed and beginner friendly, so I'm sure by the time you're done watching it, you'll be able to draft your own skirt block, and you'll need the knowledge or basically the foundation of that to make your asymmetrical pencil skirts. So go ahead and watch that video and then come back to this one. Don't forget to come back to this one. To turn a basic block into a pencil skirt, you're going to go ahead and mark 2.5 centimeters starting at the side seam line, and you want to mark that to the left and to the right as shown. You also want to mark 2.5 centimeters starting at the center back line, and then go ahead and shaping it using the varying curve ruler as shown. So basically you want to go ahead and place your varying curve so that you have a curve that touches the 2.5 centimeters point. However, if you don't have a varying curve, you can go ahead and use a ruler, and you want to basically just connect it like I did here. So you want to make sure it's a bit straight below the hip line level, and then you want to go ahead and draw a slant line to connect to the 2.5 centimeters point as shown. However, I prefer to work with a varying curve, so I've gone ahead to place my varying curve starting a little bit above my hip line level, and then I placed it like so, and then go ahead and reverse or invert, the way that you've placed your varying curve so that it touches the 2.5 centimeter point and goes back into the curve that you've drawn earlier. Afterwards, go ahead and label correctly and then cut out the pattern as shown. To make the asymmetric piece, we need to double our center front, and to do that, go ahead and take another piece of paper and then fold it vertically as shown. Then place the front piece on it, making sure the center front of the front piece aligns with the folded edge of the paper. You also want to make sure that there is enough space towards the hem of the paper. After making sure this is all done properly, go ahead and pin the center front to the folded edge of the paper, making sure that the paper is firmly pinned onto that. Then go ahead and transfer your darts onto the folded paper. To do this, I make use of a thumbtack and I basically just puncture a hole at the dart points so that it shows on the other side. Afterwards, go ahead and cut your paper using the front piece paper as a template. You want to cut all the way down, however, you want to extend beyond the pattern length. After extending the folded piece to the desired length, go ahead and cut it as shown. You also need to remember to mark out the actual pattern length, as you'll need this later on. Unpin the front pattern from the folded paper and then go ahead and draw in the darts onto the folded paper. I don't know if you can see, but those are the points that I punctured onto the paper. So just go ahead and draw in the darts using those punctures as your reference points. Now that the darts have been drawn in, the next thing for us to do is to draw in our design. However, before you do that, you want to go ahead and extend the original pattern length or the skirt length that we were working with, and then go ahead and decide where you want your design to be. After deciding what design you want to do, go ahead and draw your design onto paper. So for me, I want to draw a slant line, and I've decided not to start my slant line at the beginning of the dart. However, I want to start it at the end of the dart so that way I can eliminate that dart. So I went ahead to draw a slant line starting at the end of that dart, and then I took it all the way to the end of the desired length of the new pattern piece. And then I've gone ahead to also link that to the side seam so that it meets the front piece and the back piece of the skirt at the side seam. So that's why I have the other slant line that is short, and this way I'm happy with my design. After drawing out my design, as you can see, I've successfully eliminated that dart and I don't need it anymore. The next thing for me to do is to cut out my designs along the slant line. So go ahead and label your designs appropriately and then cut it out as shown. If you like your front flap or the asymmetrical flap without any darts, there's always the option of closing the darts with paper tape. However, I don't mind having the darts there, so I'm going to go ahead and leave the dart there. Next, go ahead and mark out the area that will be a different color, and for me, I want the part that is orange to be about 2.5 inches wide. So I've gone ahead to mark 2.5 inches from the top to the bottom, and then I'm connecting it with a slant line using my metal steel rule. Afterwards, I'm going to go ahead and label appropriately. For the first piece on the outer edge that is 2.5 inches wide, I've gone ahead to label as orange, and because I'll be cutting it with the orange fabric, and I've also written cut one piece, and I've written all my allowances so that I have 1/2 inch at the top, 1/2 inch at both sides, and then 1.5 inches at the hem. Also for the second side, I've gone ahead to write cut one piece, and that's going to be the black side, so I've written black on it, and I've gone ahead to add my allowances of 1.5 inches at the hem, 1 inch at the side seam, and the rest will be 1/2 inch as shown. Next, you want to cut out the lining. Pin the asymmetrical piece onto the lining and mark out the sewing allowances all around. You want to mark out 1 inch at the side seam. You want to mark out 1/2 inch at the other side and 1/2 inch at the top. However, at the hem, you won't be marking out anything, and this is because of the way we want our lining to be turned in. We want our lining to be about 1.5 inches shorter than the actual fabric. So at the base of the lining or at the hem of the lining, there will be no allowance added. So go ahead and cut out on your marked lines as shown. After cutting, indicate the dart position. I like to indicate the dart position by snipping the top as shown and then going ahead with a pin and chalk to mark out where my dart should stop. After indicating the dart position, go ahead and remove the pattern piece off the lining and then go ahead and sew the dart so that the dart is facing you. This is very important. The dart position is important, so you want to go ahead and sew it so that it's facing you. After sewing the dart on the lining, it is now time to cut out the main fabric using the asymmetrical pattern piece. To do this, go ahead and separate the pieces so that you have the orange and the black separate from each other. And the main reason why we cut out the lining first is so that we don't have our lining in pieces, because we're going to go ahead and join the orange and the black to give us one piece. Starting with the black piece, pin the black piece pattern onto the right side of the fabric and then go ahead and mark out your allowances. We will only be cutting out one piece of this, so go ahead and pin it onto the right side. This is absolutely important. And then go ahead and mark out the allowances of 1 inch at the side seam, half an inch at the opposite side, half an inch at the top, and then 1.5 inches at the hem. After marking out the allowances, go ahead and cut it out on this point. After cutting out the black piece, go ahead and indicate the dart onto the fabric and then go ahead and sew the dart in place. This time, the dart will be sewn facing down. When we're sewing the lining, the dart of the lining was sewn facing the top or facing up. This time it will be sewn facing down, and this is very important so that when we're placing them together, they would match properly. After sewing the dart onto the black fabric, this is what it looks like. So the next thing for me to do is to cut out the orange piece of fabric. And for me, because I'm using a really tiny piece of fabric, guys, I've had to place my pattern onto my fabric diagonally so that it would fit. The next thing, I went ahead to mark out my sewing allowances of 1.5 inches at the hem, half an inch at the sides, and then half an inch at the top as well. After marking out my allowances, I went ahead to cut out my fabric as shown. To avoid confusion, I advise that you place notches on the part that joins back to the black fabric. So basically, the line where you separated the black and the orange pieces of pattern, you want to go ahead and place notches on them so that you can join them back together without any confusion. You also want to place a notch at the top of the orange fabric so that you don't get confused, as it looks like the bottom a little bit. Pin the black and the orange pieces of fabric together, making sure that they are rightly positioned. You want to pin them all the way from the top and work your way to the bottom as shown. After pinning the two pieces of fabric together, mark out the sewing allowance of half an inch all the way from the top to the bottom and then go ahead and sew in place. After sewing the two pieces together and ironing, this is what it looks like. So the next step is to place the lining onto the fabric, making sure that the side seams, the sides and the hem are lined. And you also want to make sure that the right side of both darts are facing each other. Afterwards, go ahead and pin the hem of both pieces together, starting at one edge and working your way to the other edge. Mark out the sewing allowance and then go ahead and sew on a half-inch sewing allowance. After sewing the hem, pin the sides together, starting at the top all the way to the bottom. You don't want to pin the side seam side, you want to pin the opposite side. However, if you're not sure which of the sides that is, it's the side that looks straighter, which is the side that has the orange. So go ahead and pin the sides together as shown. And then when you get to the edge, you will notice that the fabric folds over into the lining. That is how it's supposed to be. Remember that we cut our lining 1.5 inches shorter. So basically, go ahead and pin all the way down as shown. After pinning, mark out the sewing allowance and then go ahead and sew on a half-inch sewing allowance. After sewing, this is what it looks like. Go ahead and turn it inside out, making sure to push out all the corners, and then after that give it a good iron before you sew the lining to the fabric at the top and at the side seams. This is what it looks like after ironing, and as you can see, I've gone ahead to sew the top together as well as the side seams, and this is to keep my lining and my fabric in place so that they're not moving apart from each other. Now that the asymmetrical piece is done, go ahead and fold your main fabric in preparation to cut out the skirt. To cut out the skirt, fold your fabric over like so, and then go ahead and pin your front piece or front pattern onto the fabric, making sure that the center front aligns with the folded edge. Mark out your sewing allowances of 1/2 inch at the top, 1 inch at the side seam, and then 1.5 inches at the hem. After marking out the sewing allowances, go ahead and cut it as shown. To cut out the back piece, fold your fabric over and then pin the back pattern onto the fabric, making sure that all allowances are marked accordingly, and then go ahead and cut. You want to mark out the allowance of 1/2 inch at the top, 1 inch at the side seam, 1 inch at the center back, which will be where the zip will fall, and then 1.5 inches at the hem. After marking out your allowances, go ahead and cut. Cut out the lining for both the front and the back skirt pieces, making sure that the lining is 1.5 inches shorter. To avoid confusion, I put a notch on the center back of both my lining and the fabric, and then I went ahead to mark out my dart onto the lining and the fabric. While cutting out the front lining, be sure to make sure that the center front of the paper aligns with the folded edge of the lining. Indicate the dart on all pieces, making sure to indicate the dart on the lining as well. Sew the dart on both the fabric and the lining of the front piece. After sewing the dart, this is what the front piece looks like. To give you a visual representation of what the final skirt would look like, I went ahead to fold the hem of the front piece and then went ahead to place the asymmetrical piece on it so that you can see what it will look like. Afterwards, the next thing you want to do is you want to place the lining onto the front piece so that the right sides of both the lining and the front pieces are facing each other, and then you want to go ahead and pin the hem of the fabric to the hem of the lining all the way from the beginning to the end as shown. After pinning the pieces together, mark out the sewing allowance of 1/2 inch all the way through, and then go ahead and join the pieces together by sewing. After sewing the hem together, this is what it looks like. Go ahead and flip it over to the right side and then arrange your skirt so that your skirt is in place. You want to pin the top of the skirt together, starting at the dart points and making sure that the darts align. After pinning the top together, when you flip it over to the lining, you will see that the fabric folds over. Go ahead and give it a good iron so that it folds over correctly. As you can see, this is what it looks like after ironing. After ironing, remove all the pins at the top and then go ahead and open the fabric over so that the lining is separated from the fabric. Pin the asymmetrical piece onto the fabric so that the darts and the side seam align. Then go ahead and sew it along the lines that we've sewn earlier. So you want to go ahead and sew from the top all the way to the side seam as shown. After sewing the asymmetrical piece onto the front piece, this is what it looks like. Indicate and sew the back dart on both the fabric and the lining. If you haven't notched the zip area, go ahead and put a notch on the zip area to avoid confusion. After sewing the dart on both the back piece as well as the back lining, go ahead and place the back pieces together and then start measuring from the center back or from the top of the center back. You want to go ahead and measure 10 inches vertically and then another 10 inches vertically. So you want to go ahead and measure 10 inches and 20 inches respectively. Pin the space between the 10 inches and the 20 inches mark and then go ahead and sew this space together on a 1-inch sewing allowance. You want to repeat this same process for the lining. After sewing the space between the 10 and 20 inches, you'll be left with a 10-inch gap at the top for the zip allowance, and then you'll be left with a couple of inches at the bottom, which will serve as the slits. The next thing is to go ahead and place the lining onto the fabric, making sure the right sides of the lining and the fabric are facing each other. Then you want to go ahead and pin the hem of the lining to the hem of the fabric and sew on a 1/2-inch sewing allowance. After sewing the hem, this is what it looks like. The next thing to do is to close up the slit, and to sew the slit we need to start from the top as opposed to starting from the bottom. This is because the fabric folds over, so you need to know what you're doing. So basically I want you to watch what I'm doing closely and see what I do to, close up the slit. You basically want to arrange your skirt so that the right side of the lining is facing down while the right side of the fabric is facing you. Then you want to go ahead and insert your hand in between the lining and the fabric on the side that you want to do. And then you basically want to just pin the edges together, starting at the top all the way to the bottom as shown. When you get to the bottom, you want to go ahead and sew from the bottom up the way to, where the previous stitch ends, and then you would have sewn your slit in place. I hope you understand that and it's not confusing. And as you can see, the fabric folds over towards the lining. So just go ahead and mark out the sewing allowance of 1 inch and then go ahead and sew the slit in place. After sewing, turn the back piece inside out and then make sure you push out all the corners at the slit, and then you want to go ahead and give it a good iron at this point. The next step is to sew our zipper onto the back piece, and to do this, you want to go ahead and mark out the sewing allowance of 1 inch on both sides of the back piece. After marking out the sewing allowance, go ahead and install your zip by sewing it onto the fabric. If you don't know how to do this, I've got a detailed tutorial showing you how to install a zip, and I'm going to put a link in the description bar as well as in the iCard above so you can check it out if you don't know how to install a zip. To fix the zip properly, you basically want to place the left side of the zipper onto the left side of the fabric so that the right sides of the zipper and the right side of the fabric are facing each other, and then you want to go ahead and pin that into place and sew that into place. I hope that's not confusing. However, do check out the video that I said I linked in the description bar to check out how I do that in details. After sewing the zipper onto the back piece, this is what it looks like. The next thing to do is to cover our zipper with our lining. However, before we do that, we need to cut off the excess of the zipper. After cutting off the excess of the zipper, place the lining over the zipper as it should look after. Then go ahead and place one hand in between the lining and the zipper, grabbing onto the zipper allowance like so, and then zip down the zipper so that you have easy access. Starting at the top of the zipper allowance you grabbed, go ahead and pin it all the way down, and then you want to go ahead and sew on a 1 inch allowance, making sure not to sew over the zipper. After sewing one side, this is what it looks like. Since we have a good idea, we're going to do this for the second side. So I've gone ahead to place the lining onto the fabric the way I want it to be, and then I flip the lining over so that you can see I'm going to do that again. And then you want to place your hand in between, grab onto the zipper allowance of both the lining and the fabric, and then sew together on 1 inch. After sewing the lining onto the fabric at the zipper area, this is what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it to the right side, and then I'm going to go ahead and zip it up. So we are done with the back piece at this time. Next, we'll be joining the back piece to the front piece. To do this, separate the lining from the fabric and then start at the joining where the lining meets the fabric. So basically you want to locate the joining on both front and back pieces, and then you want to go ahead and pin starting at that point, pinning your way up and then pinning your way down towards the lining. After pinning all the way on that side, go ahead and mark out the sewing allowance of 1 inch all the way from the top to the bottom, and then go ahead and sew on that sewing allowance. You also want to make sure you mark out the sewing allowance on the lining as well. So basically you're marking out from the top or from the waist of the main fabric, all through the joining, all through the waist of the lining. After sewing, this is what that side looks like. So I'm going ahead to turn it to the right side so that you can see what we have so far. And as you can see, only one side of the skirt has been done. As you can see, the asymmetrical bit meets nicely at the edge of the skirt, and that's how it should be. So now that we are done with this side, it's time to fix the other side of the skirt. To join the second side of the skirt, locate the joining of the fabric and the lining on both the front and the back pieces, and then pin them together. You want to pin from that joining all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom of the skirt. After pinning, mark out the sewing allowance of 1 inch all the way from the top to the bottom, and then go ahead and sew on that allowance. When you're done sewing, your skirt should look like this. Go ahead and turn the skirt inside out, and then go ahead and cut out the skirt band. To cut out the band, fold your fabric into 4 and then measure out the desired band width. I went with a band width of 3 inches, and that's because I want my band to be a total of 1. However, it will be folded over, so that will give me 2, and then my sewing allowances of 1/2 inch at the back and 1/2 inch in front, which is an extra 1 inch, which gives a total of 3 inches. So I've gone ahead to cut out my band width, and it's 3 inches. However, the length is long. You only need your waist measurements plus 5 centimeters sewing allowance. So I've gone ahead to measure that while my fabric is on fold, and I'm going ahead to cut out. So now my band is ready. Sew the ends of your band close by folding it over and sewing on a 1/2 inch sewing allowance at the edges as shown. After sewing the ends, turn the band inside out and push out all the corners. Before fixing the band, go ahead and pin the lining onto the fabric at the waist. You want to make sure that the dots are aligned as well as the side seams. To fix the band, start from the inside of the skirt, which is where the lining is, and then go ahead and place the band starting at one edge of the fabric, making sure that the edge of the zipper aligns with the edge of the band. Pin the band all through the waist from the inside. Sew the band in place on a 0.5 inch sewing allowance. After sewing the band in place, take out all the pins and then flip the band over. Fold the band over to the right side and then fold in 1/2 inch and pin into place. Afterwards, go ahead and top stitch the band. After sewing the band, this is what the skirt looks like, and as you can see, the skirt is now done and it looks pretty neat. So the next thing to do is to go ahead and sew the hook and eye using a hand needle, and then we are now done with our skirt. You want to give it a good iron, making sure to iron out all the seams, and then you want to make sure that you give it a good trim. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this tutorial to the very end. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope it was worth your while. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, don't forget to share, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, and don't forget to follow me on social media. Thank you and see you in my next video. Bye!